Yeah.
Hey guys, I am Hannah and I am the showrunner of the Madness of Chartrulean.
That's awesome. I'm Edward. I'm a technician, audio mix engineer working on the show also.
Yeah, and we work together to pull together the post-production efforts behind the show. And one of the things I really wanted to show you guys, just because I think it really bears a visual explanation, is what a send is, how to find it, and how to apply it to your track, and also how to activate pre-fade listen, a little more of that, and why we would even do it that way, and even why that might be somewhat I don't know if you want to call it controversial, but more so the kind of the wrong way of doing things is just how I'm
you
told.
said pre-fade listen, not pre-fade.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, it was pretty funny. So not the solo, right? That would be a pre-fade listen, I guess. And,
okay. So I said it wrong.
So, well, I don't know. We can change the name. We'll just do that. We'll just tell them what's up. So, so an aux send is, you probably know this, but like an aux send is just another mixer. So you have all your cool vocals coming in and you're going to mix them all and make your show. But what if you wanted to make another entire mix of just like a little bit of this one and a little bit of that one, a lot of this one, and send that somewhere else, right? And that's what an aux send is. It's shortened on a lot of these things. It just says aux. Now, this is not an insert or an effect. This is an aux, which just means take this whole pile the special pile of stuff and send it somewhere, and then we'll figure that out later. In this case, we're talking about sending it to a single reverb that represents the atmosphere in a place. Yeah, so there's a reason why you would have one reverb. Now, you could think the first thought would be, hey, I can put a reverb on each of these people, but what if you have 200 people and you have 200 reverbs? It's going to blow up any computer. So that's a big issue. Sometimes there's a lot of rooms. There's a lot of resources going on anyway on a larger show, and you're going to need a bunch of these to be careful with these resources. The other reason that you would have one aux send and one, one destination like this is to have a central control of the space, like the characteristics of the space, because you pick out a reverb, you think this one sounds a little like what we want, and you could make little adjustments to that one. And if there's two people talking in a room, they're both in the same room, so you're gonna, just by nature, you're going to use the same reverb for those two people in the same room. I mean, it'd be really weird if they didn't match, right? So that's another reason.
Yeah. And the biggest thing, especially for me and working on a show this size, where the projects can get very large very fast, and you might be looking at, we have some of our projects are about, on average, about 250 deep when you factor in the sound design and stuff like that. And it's just really it's not even just like a question of resources, it's a question of like time of, you can press one button and change a lot of things universally, or you can just go through and really click through, have to spend your time muting tracks and clicking on them and making, adjustments. It's just not really worth your time to get that granular with it.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So this is a project in Pro Tools, and I just pulled in a couple dialogue tracks.
So that's another thing we should talk about at some point, is that a lot of these NLEs, some of them are cheap, or, like very inexpensive or free to use. The reason why people would use something like Pro Tools is being part of a community, and in the work community, the other people working on the project will have to be using the same software, or there'd be no way to communicate back and forth. So sometimes these choices of hardware or software are based on communication. And so there's nothing actually wrong with Reaper or something like that. It's actually completely awesome. It's just that this is one way. In fact, I think we might have a copy of Reaper put on here so that we can demonstrate that at some point, that it can be done on anything.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
It's going to be messy, but
look how clean and sweet that looks.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, it's nice. There's
I
nothing in there.
It yet.
It's so nice. Okay, so I guess you're going to show this. Like you've made an aux send. Actually, we already have some.
Yeah. So what I've done here is this green track here is the aux send I've made, and in Pro Tools, you just add a track, and you can actually go here and say aux input. Usually it's a stereo channel, and you hit create, and there you go. There it is. I've already made that, so we don't need to do that. So this is actually where you put your reverbs. And in this case, I'm using the built-in reverb called Space. This actually ships with Pro Tools.
Oh, it's fun.
And this is actually just a really quick way to cycle through a bunch of kind of pre-built spaces. Some of them are pretty good, varying quality. It's like I really recommend you take the time to go through and find the ones that you think are going to be the most conducive to your project if you use something like this, because you can spend all day flipping through reverbs and trying different things.
That's a problem.
You don't want to do that 50 times.
Now, there are cheap and free reverbs that are awesome. That one actually comes with Pro Tools. There's a Valhalla.
Valhalla
can be really useful. It controls are a little weird sometimes, but there we go. That's a really inexpensive one that behaves pretty well. Some of the controls, like the midpoint, normally will be like way down near one end or something, but it's pretty good sounding. And there are also a few free VST reverbs. I'm not really sure what is what here, because we're very picky about this stuff, but you can get a good sound out of some of them, and sometimes it's unexpected. There'll be like a small room or kind of a wooden room sound, or like this show has a lot of big unrealistically gigantic spaces, so it's kind of a weird spaces.
East and West spaces is another one that we use in this project quite a bit.
Yeah, it's fun too.
Yeah. And these are, again, based on, they're simulated based on recordings of actual spaces. People have actually gone out and taken the time to capture them and turn them into software reverbs with some varying degrees of control.
Now, there are some weaknesses with spaces. It's some of these effects they really skew towards gigantic sounds that when you hear them by themselves at first, you're like, ooh, but these big giant rooms, they're only useful in these kind of big giant weird stories, so that you have this kind of limitation where a lot of people that are checking out reverbs will underestimate or underappreciate these really intimate spaces, these small reverbs that sound really beautiful, but they don't wow you if you turn them up too loud and you listen to them closely. Right. So be careful. You might, because like all the indoor like apartment sounds in this show in particular are like little wooden rooms kind of things, and that can be really beautiful. So that's
and I can talk about that a little bit, because I think a lot of these, especially East and Western spaces, they're not really made for, they're not really made with audio drama in mind. They're kind of made for music, where you're looking for a large dramatic space.
I guess really big music.
I mean,
not drums.
Who knows, but Valhalla Room,
special
for
drums.
instance, has I always like to kind of cheat and go for these like kind of preset things, which are, can get you into trouble, but also save you a little bit of time. But like, they have like presets for small wood room and stuff like that, which kind of gets you in a realm. But one thing that's kind of consistent with all of these is that when you add these to a aux channel, like we're talking about, you really want to just make sure the mix is all the way up. And that's something you probably wouldn't do if you added this straight to a channel.
You
would probably play with that a little bit until it sounded right. But
we should mention why.
I mean, do you want to talk about why?
So if in these are all cartoons of analog equipment that was used with analog consoles, and they had aux sends also, the same situation. And remember that the original music is still coming out, or in this case, the original dialogue and music and everything else is coming out regardless. So if you have the mix not at 100% or all wet, then you're mixing the dry signal, the original signal, in here as well as the main output, and you're mixing them together. And that can be very dangerous, because there can be a delay based, that the reverb can add a delay, a tiny amount, just from trying to process the signal. And when you mix the two signals together, you're going to have this horrible chorusing. That does happen. Stuff like that. It's totally up to who built the reverb, and who knows how well they, a lot of things can go wrong. So you're going to remix these sounds back, the original sound that came out and this anyway. So you'll be able to turn the aux sends output down or up that has the reverb. So you don't want to mix two things and then mix them again, right? Does that make sense, I guess?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
so that's kind of, we could spend a lot of time talking about these specific reverbs, and I just wanted to pull them in here just to kind of show. And it's sometimes like I pop this in here too, just to show this is like just a built-in kind of junk delay that's
hilarious.
Comes with Pro Tools. At least I think it did. It may have come with some other junk, but it was sometimes you don't really need a reverb. Sometimes if you have like an outdoor space or something like that, you really just need a delay. You know, something that's just going to create like an echo.
Like the outdoor, like garden spaces. Like
garden spaces. Anything if you would imagine you're outside and where you wouldn't have a lot of reverb per se because there's nothing resonant, but there is like a building or like a wall nearby and you want to hear like the sound of that wall, but you don't necessarily, you're not really necessarily in a space, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
we use that kind of thing a lot.
Yeah. And I think it just kind of bear in mind, like, so you can spend, and there are people that spend a lot of time on their reverbs and designing the right thing. I think it is,
it's dangerous.
It can be dangerous. You can really get into the weeds of it. And I think it's, again, just like kind of get it good enough, you know, and at some of these reverbs like spaces, kind of these are really great cheats. And I don't do a lot of finagling of settings in here, even though there's tabs and levers for days. I think if you can find a reverb,
you do a little bit.
Well, you know.
But okay, so the thing about this is though is that we have to decide, and I think we already it's already written in that note you put out, but about what makes the reverb. I guess we'll skip that, or do you want to talk about
that? No, we're going to skip it. You know, okay. So I think we'll just assume, you know, that this is the scene that I have pulled up here takes place in kind of an industrial corridor. And so I've pulled in the reverb that we've used for that space, which is just really kind of just this like factory reverb setting in spaces. Nice. So I've applied that to the aux send as well as the EQ, which I mention in the letter, the newsletter, because sometimes if you have like a delay, especially a big one in a large resonant space, you might get some bass buildup. And also just kind of like weird buildup in the highs. And so one way to kind of fix that just on the onset is to kind of just like, and you can be as prescriptive or sloppy about this as you want, is just to kind of throw, you know, a high pass and low pass filter on it just to kind of, is it like high pass or high cut?
High pass and low pass, the high cut.
Yeah.
You know, all those words.
Yeah.
Well, you might be familiar with this if you do live sound work or something like that, or a musical recording. So you would do this with the reverb. This is a normal behavior. Yeah. One thing, like you said, 200 and below, like 150 and below, that's the meat of the lowest part of the vocals, and some of the characters don't even go that low. And that area can, especially in these longer spaces, it can just turn into mud. Like all that stuff will build up. If you cut that down a little bit, you can tune it until it behaves the way you imagine it being. Like if you recorded this accurately, the way it would be, then it wouldn't be a very good recording. It wouldn't be nice. It's the way we mentally parse the recording. Like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, I mean, I mention that a lot because basically your brain is doing a lot of this work when you're actually in a space, you know, talking to someone or something like that. It's an incredible processor. We spent our entire lives listening to voices, and then we've spent our entire lives getting rid of noise and you know, finding detail in speech and stuff like that. So this is just trying to recreate some of that advantage in such a space, if that makes sense. And it is really typical. So that's that, right? Yeah.
So we have our aux send all ducked out with the reverb that we want to use for this particular scene and the EQ to kind of keep it under control. And so the way that we actually implement this on our tracks here is to actually go down. So the way that at least Pro Tools and even if I were to open Reaper, I have nothing in this because I've literally had this on my computer for like half an hour. But it's kind of laid out the same way to where these are all your FX inserts and these are all your sends.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
That's totally right. Don't second guess me. Yeah. So I read the manual.
I don't believe you.
I did read the manual. Not all of it, but enough to know that.
It's a lot.
Semi-verified information.
Okay.
So the way that you implement this over on your audio track is to go over to your sends, which are labeled a little more clearly in Pro Tools, to be honest. So when you click on this empty slot, you can actually go down to, you can find it in a couple ways. You can just find it based on the track name. And in my case, it's already been, cataloged as a bus channel that I can pretty easily link to. And so that is DX, Astraeus, Labs, Day. And the way that you know what it is, we'll need this, and I'm going to come back to it, is actually it says what the input of that channel is here. So you can, double check that you're in the right place.
Oh, I see.
So these are, this is redundant because I already have one, and I'll just pretend I didn't. This is actually where you control how much. So up here, how we had this, all the way turned up. We just want to hear the reverb on this. And so here is actually where you control how much of that reverb you hear on your recorded track.
Or try it?
Yeah. So this is the level that we're at for Lapidine. So we'll want to be at, similar level for Chartrulean. And I like to kind of be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to add some level lines there. So let's just kind of take a listen to a little bit of the exchange.
I should keep my mouth shut.
Yours is the only voice they will want to hear.
Yes, well,
Okay.
last night.
So you can hear the voices, you can hear the reverb. So the one thing that I'm going to do here, and this is kind of the cheat and the secret sauce a little bit, because
crux.
this is actually
The secret weapon.
this is actually the wrong way to do it. Sometimes
No,
you
it's
just
not.
have to do it the wrong
It's
way.
the correct way. It's the perfect
Right.
way.
And I'm going to attempt to explain this, and he's going to have to correct me because I'm going to get it wrong.
No.
So if you right click on your channel, and this is similar over in Reaper, you're going to actually change this. Okay, so there's two kind of types of, would you call them listening modes? What would you call them?
Well, there's two places to patch in this aux send. Like, if you imagine like this one channel, like, we've got I guess that's the Admiral right there, and you've got the main output coming out. That's after the fader. Obviously, on each channel you can turn the volume up and down with your fader, right? Minus 10 or whatever, and you can actually get this signal for your aux send before the fader or after. And in the traditional sense, you would put it after the fader. So when you turn the fader down, the reverb and the voice go down together.
Yeah, let me actually just play through it before I make any changes so you can actually hear that kind of in action. So I'm just going to write in a little volume automation to this piece of dialogue to where it's actually going to decrease in time.
The point is, if you make it pre-fade, in other words, you patch that in, like you're going to, we're going to get some of this and some of that and send it to this aux send, but we're going to send it before the faders for each channel, then, which is that automation, then the reverb would stay the same. And the reason for this traditionally is it would be sent on a live music setting to the monitors, and you wouldn't want them to be turned up and down while you're turning up the guitar solo, right? That would be a total disaster. But you would want them to turn up and down when you turn down the vocal so the reverb doesn't have the wrong mixture, right? But in this case, we're creating a space where people are talking and they're in a room and they're all in the same room. So the reverberant energy that bounces around off the walls is actually the same if you're on, right in front of someone or across the room. But if they're across the room, they will be quieter, but they'll still be making the same reverb in the room. And that's part of how we understand, with our eyes closed, space, like is the mixture of direct versus reflected sound.
Right. So let me just play this automation through real quick. And so this is using the post fade.
Last night was a reminder of how far I have to go before I can say anything remotely comprehensible.
So
it's just turning down the show.
Yeah, so you're basically just turning everything down. You're turning down the show. So if I were to right click on this and say pre-fade, listen to it again.
Last night was a reminder of how far I have to go before I can say anything remotely comprehensible.
Yeah, so as you can kind of hear, the volume of his dry signal is going down, but we still hear the reverb. So you get that effect that like he might be moving through a space. And this is, obviously there's some other things you would do to this with sound design and whatnot to obviously sell that, but this can be kind of really handy if you have someone, actually I think in the scene, This character is actually played by Edward.
Oh no!
I have this dude in the background of the scene saying no touching, and so we've applied kind of the same, all these same ideas. He's got the reverb patched in, the same one that's on Lapidine and Chartrulean, the exact same reverb. And I've got his level turned way down. So the effect that we wanted with him, and I think in his case, he might also be panned pretty far, all the way to the left. So he's off on the left side of the room.
No touching.
Why are all these people here?
Popularity is an unfortunate side effect of fortune and glory.
Yeah, so there you have it. You kind of have this person who's like way far off and some other end of the room, which we've achieved through a combination of the reverb and panning, just to give it that extra dimension. And then our conversation is still very much in the foreground. And yeah, so that's basically it. I mean, it sounds like really kind of oversimplified to be like, if you do these things, then your thing is gonna sound like a big budget show. But I think the thing that's really the selling point of this entire thing is just kind of the forethought of how these people interact with the space and how this all goes together. And like once you kind of have that picture of that reverb and that space, like the more elements you add to the scene, like all you're really doing is using things like panning and leveling to position them. It's kind of like playing Dollhouse a little bit with your mind with audio. Just once you have that one main building block figured out, which is what the space sounds like. Mm-hmm. And of course, this doesn't include your sound design and your ambiance. That's a different topic completely. But you don't have to have a lot. Just having a reverb on dry vocals can go so far if it sounds convincing.
Turning stuff all the way up and down all the way isn't as convincing as controlling it, like putting it exactly where you feel that it tells the story that you want. Because one thing really interesting about this is that it's not a movie and it's not television. So you're able to use people's minds and imagination to fill out the rest of the details. And if you give them enough space to do that, they can imagine, they can dream up the scenes and the characters and everything like that. And so if you're putting someone in background in the space, then try to like not turn them all the way off or something like that, but just different degrees that are a little bit less, because a tiny amount will make a big difference if it's next to something that your brain can compare it to. If you have a little bit less of the direct signal compared to the reverb, it can be a pretty small, like a 20% change, and you will be able to mentally see a pretty big distance, like someone 6 or 8 feet away from you facing you, and then another person like 2 feet away from you facing them. Like that's easy to imagine if you make a 20% change in the direct signal. So keep in mind that like that subtlety it can still deliver a very strong and convincing image because your brain is really, really good at decoding this stuff and really good at understanding stories.
If you wanted to add like one last dimension to this and really kind of drive home, like if you have a scene where you have two people talking and they're more intimate, versus casual, like something like this could really be used to kind of show the relationship between people in a very kind of subtle yet powerful way. And that can be done just through EQ. This is a scene that has two pretty big voices in it. And if I go to those voices, you can see their respective.
We don't show that much.
Yeah. So, yeah. So,
oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah. Getting into EQ matching is another science in and of itself.
Stay out of that one for now.
So the other thing you can do is actually use an EQ to kind of tell that story of a relationship by controlling the amount of low end that you have in a scene.
Oh, yeah. So this is about proximity effect. So this wouldn't have worked in the 1940s or something, maybe before then, because we've gotten so used to radio and then television, kind of the audio component of these things. That's probably too sharp, but what happens is, when you're really far away from a microphone or you're using an omnidirectional microphone at any distance, there's a certain amount of low and highs and stuff like this, and you might be familiar with all this. If you get too close to the microphone, there's like all this low, like it's kind of weird, and that low stuff piles up because of the way the microphone makes the pattern. It's just some mechanical garbage inside. It uses a signal in the back to make the pattern, and when you get too close, you're closer than the ratio. It doesn't make any difference. But what happens is we're so used to this. We understand this so deeply now that we subconsciously place people based on this. This is a mental thing, right? So if you look at an EQ around 150 or 100, somewhere in there, if you get the slope of this thing to like stop at about 1,000 and have no effect above 1,000 or so, and have quite an effect below 150 or something like that, that might do. It'll basically move people away mentally because of our kind of subconscious understanding of this kind of radio voice kind of thing. It's a weird deal. You'll have to experiment with it a little bit, but the maximum is about 6 dB an octave. So like if you look at the thing, it'll be like an octave is, like 1,000 to 500 and 500 to 250 and whatever on. And then if it's 6 dB at 500 and 12 dB at 250, that's pretty severe. So way less than that might be needed, but you can move people back into the background without doing it too seriously. And especially today when we're like really crammed in there with a lot of these studios are smaller and people are talking a lot closer in, so that this can be a way to nudge the idea of distance if you're careful. And it does work, very well.
Yeah, and I can actually show you a little bit of that. So I'm going to copy and paste the same EQ over to the Lapidine so you can kind of hear, just to kind of show you this is what it sounds like without it.
Cope with it however you need to, but please save some energy for the summit.
I already spent whatever energy I had on minor grievances yesterday.
So the point is like they're very close and they're very intimate. This is like obviously portraying a relationship where they confide in one another. So to kind of change that dynamic a little bit, I'm just going to take out some of the low end and see what happens.
Cope with it however you need to, but please save some energy for the summit.
I already spent whatever energy I had on minor grievances yesterday.
Yeah, so immediately, without really taking out much, it only takes out 3 dB of their low end. It's obviously, it's already a lot less formal, and it's already
changes the tone.
Yeah, totally changes. So it's like if you have people that they don't really trust each other, or they're like really trying to kind of like, if the conversation is very surface and formal, you might do this. And if it's a very intimate conversation, you might even increase the low end if you're dealing with a voice actor that doesn't have a lot of it. Mm-hmm. So it can be another way to not just show space in the scene, but relationships between the characters.
Yeah, another element that we probably shouldn't get into, but is that we actually automate these. So when people are moving throughout the space, or even when an idea appears in the conversation, like people can meet and say, "Hey, what's up, dude?" And then as soon as they start talking about their like all their personal problems or something like that, they might get a lot closer and a little bit, kind of more in there. And we actually adjust the environment as your attention would have adjusted if you were there. Like you would, when you see people in a room, you see the people, you see objects, you make meaning of them. And then when they're having a really important conversation later, you don't see any of that crap. You're looking right at them, and you're in this thing. Well, we actually reduce the environmental sounds. We increase the bass to create that, right? And then we do a lot of that just so there is a way on most software where you can actually turn the knob up and down through time, and that gets a little out of scope, but that's it.
It is out of scope, but at the same time, I think it's just worth driving home. You might be like, well, we're talking about reverb, this is supposed to be about like, how do we make something sound expensive? And I think a lot of that is like, you can pile on the sounds, like you can get these giant sound libraries and just pile it all on there. We have a couple sound libraries and we pull from stuff, we also pull some stuff from, some more affordable, like really, cheapy sound libraries that everybody, uses. A lot of people have access to, like Epidemic, we're not doing anything fancy here. But I think there's a misconception that, production value comes from a lot of fancy plugins.
That's a good point, because a lot of people can add a bunch of junk without meaning, without telling a story. And it'll just sound like a bunch of junk piled up. Like that, one of the most valuable things in this is silence. Is if there's a difference, a contrast between the loud and quiet things, the louder things change. Like if it's all wall of sound, then there's no contrast, and then that's actually really important to that. And
yeah. I mean, this is the value is really in the minutia and the things that you don't notice. That's what kind of makes it feel expensive, because that's what you're doing to elevate your performances and your writing. And those are actually, it's like you might have these like wowing things, like we might have, like we have a pretty cool soundtrack and stuff like that, and people might fixate on that. And we're like, well, maybe that's it. But you can have really awesome music, but if this kind of stuff isn't, if there's no glue at those seams and you're kind of skipping out on these types of storytelling details, then it's like that's going to be felt and noticed, and it's not going to have the same impact. If you have all this production and wowy stuff and expensive plugins, no one can see the expensive plugins. They don't know they're there.
No, that's true.
We don't even use them. We have a few we have a few toys and a little bit of secret sauce, but it's shockingly little.
I mean, that's most of it really right there, right?
Yeah, really. It's a lot of it's just like,
and a lot of these elements end up in everything, like
a reverb.
Of a bunch of the sounds, because the thing is, the reverb isn't to make it big. The reverb is to replace the space. And so you have to get it all the way down until it sounds real, which means almost inaudible, like in most cases, unless it's really big space or something stupid, which happens a lot in this particular one. But it just has to be real and believable, and what you imagine to be real, I guess you would say. Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, that's about it. We've probably prattled on for more than we really should have. But
Sorry.
Anyway, yeah, if you're still with us,
can get worse.
Maybe this is bonus stuff you probably didn't ask for, but hopefully it's useful, and hopefully having some semblance of a visual has been cool and awesome. Even though I'll probably have to add some kind of dancing something here to make this a little more interesting, because I feel like we've been talking more than we have been showing. So.
Well, yeah. Thanks for hanging out anyway. So that's cool.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
You're cool.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.